An abandoned mental health facility was the perfect place to explore, until we went inside. In Redding, California, a mental health facility was built. They said it was made to help in the Tri-City area, yet rumors ran their course. Most of the people taken were either homeless people or declared insane. In a town that had little in money or resources, this meant that no one kept track of what happened to them after. After 5 years, they closed down without a word, never to be heard again. David told me all of this with a mischievous grin. He knew this kind of stuff was right up my alley. Putting down the survival magazine I bought from Barnes & Noble, I admit he had me hooked by the end. He barely had to ask when he extended his hand to bump fists. It's been a whole month and no one's coming back for the place. It's the edge of town and we got nothing better to do on a Friday. You down? I grabbed all my best gear that I hoarded over years of LARPing as a stalker in Pripyat. I lent David my spares as he grabbed his camera equipment. With backpacks full of everything ranging from MREs, water, and gas masks, we were set for anything. The trip was in a busted Honda Civic I got from a Craigslist exchange downtown. Wind blew in our hair on the I-5 with heavy metal blaring in blown speakers. It was just past the edge of town at sunset when we arrived. Funny thing about Northern California is as soon as you leave the border of a city it changes in an instant. Miles of tall dry grass and taller trees as far as the eye can see. It was in one of these thickets guarding a dirt road where we made our stop. I pulled out a Pall Mall, offering one to David who politely declined, and we made our plan. All right, we go in. We take a few pictures and stay within 30 feet of each other. Flashlights on, and as soon as it hits 75% on our phones we roll out. I want a good amount in case things turn south. Any questions? David seemed annoyed by me taking charge but shrugged and let it go. He knew stuff like this was my hobby, which is why he asked me to join him. And if we run into a psycho down there to chop us up? I pulled out my army surplus knife with an evil grin. We chop back with these. I tossed him my old machete and began the trip inward. It was a dirt road we were taking, so it wasn't even considered a hike, but it was about 1.5 miles till we arrived. The building was an ominous slab of concrete shaped into a cube, haphazardly painted white. The red band around the top made it look like more than an abandoned warehouse, yet it was the size that bothered us. Hey Travis. David tapped my shoulder. Wasn't this place supposed to house like 1,000 people? That's what you told me. I shrugged but agreed with the insinuation. Why does it look so small? The whole building couldn't have been more than a small apartment complex in size. With the windows concrete slits and the iron doors chained up, it looked more like an abandoned parking garage than anything. With a pair of bolt cutters meth heads would be salivating for. We broke the chain to the front door. Despite the chain it remained locked, so I looked closer. The lock on the door was a master lock. Same brand as the dollar store. I rolled my eyes, muttering to myself. They really spared no expense. As David kept watch I whipped out my lock-picking set and got to work. It wasn't 5 minutes before I heard the click of the latch and in we went. The entrance was as expected. Dark and empty, spiderwebs on abandoned office equipment. Graffiti lined the walls as well as what David and I assumed to be fake blood. Punk kids and squatters wasted no time. Neither of us were too worried until coming across some of the rooms. Beds and recliners lay in sterile rooms next to abandoned equipment. Wires with little pads hanging off the end showed that electroshock therapy was apparently alive and well. David shuddered at the thought of being subjected to such misery. With the dismal green of the walls and lack of light, it looked more like a torture chamber. We took our time exploring and gathering photos. Venturing further in, we found a room full of filing cabinets. The thing was that in there we also found another door. This one going to a basement. Not only was it covered with a gurney, but the pair of doors were chained as well, just like the front. I looked at the lock as well. Much more expensive and not worth picking in the dark. We checked our batteries and the percentage lay at 85. No excuse to pull out. Thought the find was unexpected. I eyed David and raised a shrug. So what do you think? David mulled the options over. Can you get in? That's not the question. I clacked the bolt cutters twice like Pac-Man. All the tumblers in the world won't save you from a pair of irons. Question is, do we want to? David shrugged in return, unspooked from the trip so far. We came this far. I nodded in agreement. Snapping the chains apart, I pried the door open with my crowbar and David shed some light inside. A stone set of stairs led further into darkness. I swallowed hard, descending first to prove my bravery. Going down was when I noticed that just above the door were the spray-painted words, "Emergency, keep out." The deeper in the darker it got. Weirder too, as any charade of it being a mental health facility was gone within the first few rooms. The equipment got more technical and the trappings of a home for the troubled were non-existent. The exception being lab coats and drawers full of tools that looked to be for surgery. A foul smell of ammonia filled the air, followed by the undertone of copper. It was so bad we decided to don the masks. Lord only knew what diseases we were getting, but still we traveled on. It was then we heard a low clicking down one of the tunnels. It sounded thick and throaty with an echo. Crazy enough, it reminded me of those giant birds on TV. I think they were called a shoebill if I remember right. The sound seemed to come from behind us as well, yet it likely was the echo. I stopped low and listened for it to come again. "Did you hear that?" I asked David as he crept beside me. He nodded in response. "What do you think it was?" The tension was thick in the air, yet nothing had popped up enough to justify leaving. I guess neither of us wanted to be called chicken. We waited there for a minute or two until David broke the silence. "Do you see that, over there?" His fear was immediately replaced by excitement as he rushed into an adjacent room. I followed after, and as I stood in the doorway, the view shocked me to my core. Giant tubes of glass with pools of fluid stood shattered along the wall. A green glow emanated from the backup computer, which I assumed held its own generator. It gave the fluid in the vats an ethereal glow as we stood in awe of what must have been some kind of biological housing case. The question was for what? We wandered around the room with jaws open. It was when I turned my flashlight to the wall beside us when the fun subsided. A man in a lab coat lay with chest torn open. Its face was completely bitten off and his ribs lay open like a blooming onion. Entrails hung out of him as his limbs were gloved of any scrap of meat, it save the sinews dangling among bare threads. I choked back my revulsion as David began to hyperventilate behind me. That low clicking reverberated again, yet now it was loud and bassful, vibrating through the room and up my spine. Before I could turn around, the piercing shriek of my best friend tore through my ears, cut short by tearing meat and a wet slop hitting the floor. I'll admit that I'm a coward. I'll admit that my gear and dreams of exploring came to nothing. I ran from that room and back in the dark from whence I came. Leaving my friend behind, I never dared to even look behind me. Our weapons never even came to mind. The gas mask came right off as tears ran down my face. My breath gasped in every fouled ounce of air, choking as tar gurgled in my lungs. I tore down that hall as fast I could, praying to whatever God would listen that I would make it out alive, in sobs that never made a sentence. It came nothing, however. I turned the tunnel to reach the stairs and saw why the click echoed behind. Its skin was gray of bluish hue with a ring of feathers around its face and neck. Its jaws held teeth instead of beak, glimmering with yellow eyes as it stared me down in the light from my hand. Its arms held claws like knives, yet were nothing compared to the blackened barbs as big as my arm which that thing called its feet. It stepped once, and again, the clicking in its throat replaced by a screech which froze me like a rabbit before a lion. Any sense of flight or flight escaped me as I only stood frozen in terror. The last thought flashing in my mind was a memory from a children's show and a single word explaining how I was to die. Velociraptor. Subscribe and please like. Thanks for tuning in and listening.